Good day everyone, this is your Sir Balo, and for this video lecture, I will be discussing the second phase of the uh, in designing a database, no? The logical database design. No? Now this is for the relational database model, no? Because as I mentioned in the previous uh, lesson, no? Sa conceptual database design, yung logical database design, it will depend on the type of database or anong klaseng paradigm ng database yung gagamitin niyo. Now, since as mentioned in this slide, it's relational data model. So, which means yung outcome to or output to is ang pagka-structure ng data mo is in the form of tables. So if you're familiar with the MySQL, no, Postgres, SQL Server, MariaDB, so those are examples of database management systems na relational yung database paradigm niya. Okay. Now, moving on. Now, before muna natin i-discuss yung logical database design, I will discuss you shortly, no? Ano tong user view? Kasi mame-mention itong user view na to in the next few slides. At least you have an idea no, kung ano may ibig sabihin ng user view and why, what's the reason, anong gamit ito. Okay, so anyway, user views is defined what is required of a database system from the perspective of a particular job role, such as manager or supervisor, no? So, or perhaps in the enterprise application area, such as marketing, personnel, or stock control. So, when you say user view, again, parang ano lang yan, user requirement specification lang siya. But, from the perspective ng, depende sa pagkakano mo. Let's say, if you want to collect your data, or the data that was collected rather, no, by let's say a systems analyst, it was collected through according to job roles. So example, yung systems analyst nag data gathering siya, sa first inuna yung mga managers, then sunod yung mga supervisors, and then other job roles, perhaps secretary, ano pa ba yung mga sales staff. Okay, so yun. Okay, it's just a user requirement, no? Pero hindi pa itong user requirement specification to, hindi pa to as a whole. It was gathered from a certain perspective, no? Whether that perspective is for a certain job role ba yan, or to a certain area ng isang enterprise, let's say marketing, personnel, or HR, ano pa ba yung mga departments sa isang establishment, financial department, parang ganun. Okay, anyway, we'll have some visual examples later, ano ba yung, to describe, no, in detail antong user views. So there are three main approaches to managing the requirements of a database system with multiple user views. Excuse me. Okay. So the first is the centralized approach, then the view integration approach, and then the last, the combination of the both approaches. So ito yung centralized approach in managing multiple user views. So, kunyari, ito yung na-mention kanina. Let's say, for example, yung mga user views mo. User views that was, say, manager, supervisor, sales staff. So, let's say these are three different user roles. And what happens is, next, no, sa susunod na step is, itong mga user views na to, These let's say job roles, no. Let's say for example mga job roles to sila. No? And for each job role, kinolect yung mga user requirements nila. No? Ano ba yung user requirements ni na mention, no? Na collect, no, galing kay manager, ano yung user requirements na collect mo kay supervisor, and so on and so forth. Okay, and then after collecting the or gathering the user views for each user view, so kaya siya centralized kasi is you're going to combine all these user views into one. And then after that, itong lahat ng user view requirements, basically ito na yung pinaka niya, user requirement specification. So all the details that was mentioned here, yun na yung magiging basis to create the ER model, yung ERD mo, no? Yung mga data dictionary and other supporting documentation. And this is yung result niya is conceptual data model na global. Okay? This again, these are yung output ito, no, from the user requirements, as we mentioned in the previous lesson, no, user requirements, and then it will be transformed into a conceptual database model and back up with other supporting documentation, data dictionary, etc. This is the global. Itong output na conceptual data model na to is global. Okay? So, and then after that, yun na yung magiging basehan mo to create their database system. So that's what centralized approach is. And on the other hand, yung other approach, which is yung view integration, medyo maliit siya, no? Let me zoom this one para makita nyo. Ayun. So again, this is the view integration. Kanina, that was centralized. Now, ito yung pinagkaiba niya in managing user views, no? So instead of yung kanina, kaya siya centralized kasi yung user views ng bawat user view, ay yung user view requirements, no? These three different user view requirements, rather than combining them as a single user view requirement, yung nangyari is each individual user view requirements ginawan sila ng conceptual database design. So ito, ginawa siya ng separate nga database design or user view, no? This one also has its own separate conceptual database design, and this one also. And itong tatlo na to, tatlong conceptual database designs along with the user views, no? Ito yung tinatawag na local data model. Kasi the reason that's local kasi this is data model based on the perspective of this user view. Si user view 3 or kay user view 2. So these are local data models. Okay, so yung pinagkaib niya with the global data model, no? And nagiging global data model lang siya once that all of the local data models were combined together. And yung result niyan, the combined results of all these user views, ano na siya, magiging global data model na siya. And yeah. Okay. So yun lang pinagkaiba lang niya with the centralized approach. And this portion, ito. So rather than combining in the centralized approach, rather than combining these user views, so each user view requirements are created with individually, no, with a local conceptual data model. And then after that, tsaka pa lang sila kinombine itong ng mga conceptual data models na to create the global na talaga na conceptual data model. Yeah. And yeah. Now, going to the actual ano natin, yung main content that we're going to discuss is the logical database design. No? So ano ba yung objective ng logical database design? So at its objective is to translate the conceptual data model into a logical data model. Yun. So ganun lang. That is why you cannot proceed with the logical database design hanggat hindi ka pa nakakagawa ng conceptual data model. Whether that conceptual model is a local or a global data model. So, yan. You cannot proceed to this step or to this phase hanggat wala ka dito. Okay? Conceptual data model. And then to validate this model to check that it is structurally correct and able to support the required transactions. So, nasa ano na tayo? Step 2. No? So, yung sa conceptual database design, step 1 pa lang yun. Ito, excuse me. Ito sa step logical database design, step 2 na siya. And same with the conceptual, may mga sub-steps pa to. So, expect that this step 2 has 2.1, 2.2, or whatsoever. So, ito na yung mga individual steps niya in order to build the logical data model. So, first is to derive the relations or tables, no? Another term for relations is table, no? Excuse me. Step 2.1 is to derive relations for logical data model. Then the next is to validate the relations. So, we convert each data model into a logical data model na relation, no? And then yung output natin dito sa 2.1, dito sa 2.2, i-validate natin yun using normalization. So, dito na papasok si normalization. No? You can use normalization as a validation technique. No? And then after that, validate relations against user transactions. So it's the same thing that we did with the conceptual data model, but this time we are validating the logical data model na against the user transactions. Then 2.4, check integrity constraints. 2.5, review logical data model with user. So, and then 2.6, to merge the local data models into global data. So, yun. So, that is why I mentioned a while ago itong logical data models and global data models so that you will understand ano ba ibig sabihin ito. And this is just an optional step. So, later I will discuss it. Bakit optional step lang to. And then last is to check for future growth. So it pertains to the database, the logical data model na ginawa mo. I-check mo if there's future growth for this. Okay. So since this video will be magiging mahaba to kasi just to inform you ahead, no. Yung pinakamahaba dito na di-discuss na in this lesson will be just 2.1. Ito. Then the rest are just hindi na masyadong kayo. So, I guess I'll be focusing this first part of this video sa 2.1 lang. Okay. And sorry. Excuse me. Sorry for the voice na medyo lang yung boses ko. Problema. Anyway, let us proceed with the first step 2.1, no? So yung pinaka first step in building the logical data model is to derive relations or tables, no, for logical data model. So in this step, we derive relations for the logical data model to represent the entities, relationships, and attributes. We describe the composition of each relation using a DBDL, no? So, ano ba ibig sabihin ng DBDL? Database Design Language for relational databases. Okay? So therefore, pag sinabing logical data model, hindi na to siya pareha sa katulad ng ng conceptual data model na may mga diagrams, may mga square, may mga shapes. It's more on closer to the, if you're familiar with the MySQL commands. Parang ganun. Closer to that. No? When that, if you if you're familiar with the syntax on how to create table sa MySQL, parang ganun na din. Yung tinatawag na DBDL. So anyway, you will I will show you a lot of examples on how do we ano ba tong DBDL, no? So that's what we're going to use to represent the logical data models. Anyway, using the DBDL, we first specified the name of the relation, followed by the list of the relation's simple attributes enclosed in brackets. So bale, dinidescribe lang na dito on how we're going to write yung mga how we're going to kasi written form kasi ito eh. Hindi na to siya, when you say logical data model, more on written na siya rather than shapes and arrows and stuff. Yan. Kaya as we mentioned, anyway, if this one may seem confusing to you, anyway, I have examples naman. So yun nga, just to give you a overview on how we're going to write down our logical data models. So yun nga, isusulat yung pangalan ng table, relation, no? And then isusulat mo rin din yung mga yung mga attributes ng table na yun, ng entity na yun, no? Kasi yung entity pa sa conceptual data model, nakalimutan ko pala na. Pagdating sa logical data model, yung entity sa conceptual data model magiging relation. Relation na siya ang tawag in the logical data model. So kaya if you're confused, no. Anyway, we have masyado na akong sinasabing anyway. So I'll just proceed na lang para magets niyo. We then identified the primary key and any alternate or foreign keys. So remember, I'm gonna say alternate key. Ito yung mga keys na hindi pinili as primary key but can be used as a primary key in the future. Just in case we're going to change natin yung primary key kasi it's possible that we were able to identify two or more primary keys, no, candidate keys, no. So yan, and again, we identify the primary keys, the alternate keys, and the foreign keys. And following the identification of a foreign key, the relation containing the reference primary key is given. And then any derived attributes are also listed along with how each one is calculated. So yeah. So the relationship that an entity has with another entity is represented by the primary key, foreign key mechanism. So yeah. So I guess you're already familiar with the primary key, foreign key in your other lessons. In deciding where to post or place the foreign key attribute, we must first identify the parent and child entities involved in the relationship. So take note, we must para naman natin malalaman kung alin dito magkakaroon ng foreign key. So it kind of depends, no. We have to first identify alin dyan sa mga entities, yung parent tsaka yung child. Okay. Then the parent entity refers to the entity that posts a copy of its primary key into the relation that represents the child entity to act as the foreign key. So let's break it down, no, para mas mag-get nyo. Yung parent entity daw, yung tinutukoy nito is yung entity na nagpo-post or naglalagay ng copy ng kanyang primary key sa another table or entity, no, that represents the child entity. And that primary key na galing sa parent na yun, nilagay mo sa another entity, which is a child entity. So, foreign key na yun siya tawag. Yan. And we describe how relations are derived for the following structures that may occur in a conceptual data model. So, strong entity types. I'm sure you already know what are these strong entity types. This was discussed in the very first lesson. Weak entity types, the one-to-many binary relationship types. No? When we say binary, yung involved sa relationship is dalawang entities. Okay? Kasi kung tatlo, ano yan? Third party na yan. That's ternary na. No? So, again, binary relationship types. These are entities. There are two entities that are involved in the relationship. Yeah. And then, one-to-one recursive relationship types, superclass, subclass relationship types, many-to-many, complex relationship types, and then multi-valued attributes. Okay, so we'll start with the first one, strong entity types. So for each strong entity in the data model, create a relation that includes all the simple attributes of that entity. So for composite attributes such as name, include only the constituent simple attributes. Pasensya na, medyo nahihirapan ako mag-pronounce. No? Again, for composite attributes, pag sinabing composite, these are attributes that is a combination of simple attributes. For example, yung name, di ba? Kasi yung name is composed of two simple attributes, the first name and the last name. So, according here, no, pag mag-ano na tayo, maglilista na tayo galing sa conceptual data model, kung may composite attributes man doon, yung isusulat mo lang yung simple attributes niya. Okay? So anyway, if this may not make sense to you, here's a example. Eto. So this is an example of a strong entity type kasi of course, it has a primary key, and these are the following. Ito yung pangalan ng entity natin. Ito yung mga attributes niya. And this one right here, we can automatic nating malalaman. This is a composite key kasi yung name, yung baba niya, may naka-indent yung first name and last name, may spaces dito. It means that itong first name and last name are simple attributes that make up this name na composite attribute. So yeah. Again, according doon, you just, in order to create the relation, you just include all the simple attributes. Tapos yung mga composite attributes, ilalagay mo lang yung simple attributes. So that is why, for this entity and stuff, this is how you're going to write its relation. This logical data model relation. No? So, you just simply write lang yung pangalan ito. And then, you list down all its attributes, staff number, first name, last name, position, the sex, and the date of birth. And then you just enclose it in the open and close parentheses. And then if my primary key, so PK, that stands for primary key. So you write it there, primary key, and then staff number. Yan. So yan, ganun lang kasimple, no? How you going to derive relations from strong entity types. Okay, so next we have weak entity types. So for each weak entity in the data model, create a relation that includes all the simple attributes of that entity. So parang paras lang with the strong entity, no? But however, no, yung primary key ng weak entity is partially or fully derived from each owner entity. So ano ba yung ibig sabihin nitong owner entity? You will know in the next slides soon. No? Basta, yung main point nito is, since yung weak entity, pag sinabing weak entity, wala yung primary key. So, it has to rely on its owner entities, no, para magkaroon siya ng primary key. Okay? So, the identification of the primary key of a weak entity cannot be made. No? Yung pag-identify ng primary keys para sa ating weak entity, hindi pa natin magagawa. No? Hanggat, no, until after all the relationships with the owner entities have been mapped. So, that's why once we're done with mapping everything, no, creating all deriving relationships for all those na mention natin kanina, that's the time na makaka-create, kaka-identify na tayo ng um, primary key for the weak entity. So in this example right here, we have here client and preference. So ito yung weak entity kasi wala siyang primary key. And this client, this one is ito yung ito yung owner niya entity. So for example, the weak entity preference in the previous figure, yung kanina, is initially mapped to the following relation. So, gano'n lang. You just write the name of the entity, then you list down its attributes. So, since dalawa man lang yung attribute dito, so yun lang. That's what you're going to write it here. Then enclose it in the parenthesis, open close, primary key, none at present. So, ano lang muna. Anyway, this one, nilagyan lang to ng none. Although kayo, you can just leave it blank, no? If kayo yung gagawa. Pero in-specify lang natin dito na none, no? So that hindi kayo malito. Na as of at present, no, wala pa tayong for the preference. Anyway, in the next slide, babalikan kasi natin itong preference. That is why in-indicate dito na none at present. Kasi in the next few slides, no, we will go back to this one. Okay? And in this situation, the primary key for the preference relation cannot be identified until after the states relationship has been appropriately mapped. So, yung states relation, this is referring to this one. No? Okay. So, next we have one-to-many binary relationship types. So, for each one-to-many binary relationships, the entity on the one side of the relationship is designated as the parent entity. And the entity on the many side is designated as the child entity. So, that's, yun nga, as I mentioned, no, how are you going to identify the parent? So, kailangan yung parent entity, kailangan mo lang kung alin sa dalawang entities yung one side. And then, sa child entity, paano mo malalaman, you just need to identify alin sa dalawang entity na yun yung many side. Okay? And to represent this relationship, we post a copy of the primary key attributes of the parent entity into the relation representing the child entity to act as foreign key. So, here's an example. So, this is an example of a one-to-many binary relationship. Bakit, no? It's because between the staff and client, as you observed, no? This staff registers 0 or many clients. And on the other hand, itong client na to is registered, clients, no, are registered by isang staff. So if you're going to map this one, no, let's have an example. Anyway, just to quick review of our lesson, no. So let's say for example, we have the staff right here. Let's just represent the staffs as mga tuldok. Same with the client, no. Let's say dalawang client. Gawin na lang natin tatlo na lang, no. And according here, staff registers 0 or more clients. So pwedeng si staff, itong staff na to, wala siyang ni-register. However, this one, it registers many clients. And this one also registered this client. And on the other hand, ang isang client is isang client is registered by one and only one staff. So yeah, no, if we're going to read it from this perspective, galing dito, this client is registered by this staff, and this one is registered by this staff. So yeah, based on our quick drawing, no, this one is a binary, one to many binary relationship, and yun, it's easy to identify, no, asan dito yung main one side tsaka yung many side, no, going back, no, as yung one side and then the many side. Yung one side again is the parent, and then yung many side is the child. So if you're going to observe here, asan dito yung one side, it's this one, the staff, no? And if you want to identify asan yung many side, which this is the child, is the sorry, namali ako. Yan, tama. So, sorry. Many side yung child. Yeah. So, yun. So, since the staff is the one side, and then this one is the many side, no? Anyway, if this one doesn't make sense pa rin to you, you can just observe na lang based on the multiplicity. Ito man, no? This is another way to identify which is the one side and the many side. If you can identify kung alin dito yung may asterisk dito, this asterisk represents the many, zero or many, so automatic this one right here is our child, no? So kung let's say kung yung asterisk is nandito and then 0 to many siya, so ito yung child. But in this example here, yung asterisk is on the right side. So I am talking to this one. Ito pala, ito. Since the asterisk is on this one sa many side, no? So yeah, child to, client. So that is why we again, let's just yung nangyari is we just write down all yung staff and then yung client, then again listing down all those attributes niya. Then if there's a primary key, you just write it down. Ito may primary key din siya, and at the same time meron din pala siyang alternate key, email, no? Kasi it's possible na a client has kasi yung emails unique talaga yan, no? Unique yan, for you're not allowed to create duplicate email accounts, not allowed, no? So kaya talaga this is a unique, and that's why alternate key siya. And anyway, ang pinaka main dito is this one, no? Since this stuff is our parent, no? Ito yung parent, and then ito yung child. So according dito, no, we post a copy of the primary key attributes of the parent. So ika-copy natin yung primary key attribute galing sa parent entity, and then ilalagay natin siya sa child entity, and that's why ito yung nangyari, no? This stuff number, which is the primary key natin for the stuff, kinapi siya to this client. So that is why this client, although it doesn't have itong stuff number, no? Although originally wala siyang stuff number dito, so nilagyan siya. And this one right here is our foreign key. So that is why meron tayong additional statement dito, no? This one, foreign key, staff number. This one is referring to this one, no? References the staff number. This one is referring to this one. Okay, baka nalito kayo. Yung foreign key, staff number, ito yung pinapoint niya. And itong staff number dito na specify dito, no, ito yung pinapoint niya. So, ganun. Okay, so next, one-to-many binary relationship types. This is just a continuation, no, of in the case where a one-to-many relationship has one or more attributes. This one is referring to the relationship, no. Kasi if you can recall, no, relationships can also have attributes. Hindi lang entities yung pwedeng magkaroon ng attribute, no. Pwedeng yung mga relationships can have attributes, no. So ito yung ibig sabihin niya. So if that's the case, no, these attributes should follow the posting of the primary key to the child. So basically, itong mga attributes sa relationship doon lang ilalagay sa child relation. This is a child child relation. Here's an example. So this one is itong date register is the attribute for the registers relationship. So according sa statement natin dito, ito daw ilalagay natin we will put this into the child entity. And since our child entity is the client, so that is why we should dito sa client na to, we put the data register here. Nilagyan na natin siya ng additional attribute date register, and this data register came from the relationship attribute. Yun. Okay. So, next we have one-to-one binary relationship types. So, creating relations to represent a one-to-one relationship is slightly more complex, as the cardinality cannot be used to help identify the parent and child entities in a relationship. True, no? Kasi instead, the participation constraints are used to help decide whether it is best to represent the relationship by combining entities involved into one relation, or by creating two relationships and posting a copy of the primary key to one relation to another. Okay, this may not make sense to you kasi medyo wordy siya. We'll have examples naman later, no. And we consider how to create relations to represent the following participation constraints. So, ito yan these are the following possible participation constraints, no, between two entities. So, the first one is yung mandatory participation on both sides. No? 1-to-1, take note, 1-to-1. And then this another scenario in which yung may mandatory lang participation, yung isa lang na side, no? Isang entity lang. And then in the third scenario, so both of these entities optional yung participation nila. So ano ba yung strategy nito if ever maka-encounter ka ng ganitong scenario for a one-to-one binary relationship, no? So let us first discuss itong A. So in this case, we should combine the entities into one relation. So ito yung keyword dito. Combine natin yung dalawang entities na yun into one relation and choose one of the primary keys of the original entities to be the primary key. And while the other, if one exists, is used as alternate key. So, magkakaroon lang tayo ng alternate key if in case na yung dalawa, each entity has its own primary key. Kasi isa out of the two primary keys between the primary keys between the two entities, isa lang yung pipiliin natin, and yung isa na hindi mapili, yun na yung alternate key. Okay, so I have an example right here. Let's say client states preference. Client states one and only one preference, and a preference is stated by one and only one client. No, so paano natin masabi na mandatory yung participation niya, no? Kasi yung sinabi dito is mandatory. It's because of this one. Oh. Kasi pag sinabing pag 1, no? Pag 1 dito ito. Ano natin to. Ibig sabihin mandatory yung participation ni client. Okay? Ito naman, no? Mandatory din yung participation ni preference. So, the key to identify the participation constraint is on the first number na naka-indicate dito sa multiplicity. Mandatory. Hindi ko na lang susulat, medyo pangit kasi yung penmanship ko pag naka-mouse lang. Basta ito, pag 1 to, ibig sabihin mandatory yung participation ni client. Pero pag 0 to, optional lang yung participation ni client. And same also with the preference, pag 0 to, so optional din yung participation ni preference. So, since this is mandatory participation on both sides, ano ba yung gagawin natin? Again, we combine the entities into one relation and then pili lang tayo ng primary key between the two and then yun. So, since itong client na to, this between these two, itong client lang na entity yung may primary key, so automatic isa lang yung natin, primary key. Wala na tayong alternate key. Matic na to, ito na yung primary key natin once we combine these two entities. So that's why this is the result. So yun. So client number, F name, L name, tel number. Etong 5 na to, this is from the client. And tsaka yung ito, this is from the preference. And asan pa yung staff number? Ay, sorry. Dapat. Oh, yeah. Ano na pala? Kaya pala merong staff number dito kasi sa sa previous example to. No? Kasi natin, let's say, natapos ka na dito sa staff. Asan naman yun? Ito, yan. Dyan galing yung staff number. No? Okay. So, it only means na sa itong example na to, natapos na tayo with we were able to derive relations between the staff and the client. Kaya meron siyang Okay. But anyway, yung main point dito is again, you combine in the mandatory participation on both sides, you just combine entities into one relation and then choose one of the primary keys. Ganun lang. That's how simple it is, no? Okay, so let's proceed, no? In the case where a one-to-one relationship with mandatory participation on both sides has one or more attributes, these attributes should also be included in the merged relation. So again, itong attributes na to, this is referring to the attributes sa relationship. So in this, for example, ganito yung scenario, no? Let's say, minodify natin yung example kanina. This time we have attribute date stated for this one, states na relationship. So lang natin, lagay lang natin dito sa sa kinumbine natin na by the way, ayun, tama yeah. Again, date stated, saan to galing, it came from this one, there. So next we have mandatory participation on one side lang. No? So in the case we are able to identify the parent and child entities for the one-to-one relationship using the participation constraints, the entity that has the optional participation is designated as the parent entity. So yan, na-underline na siya. Again, pag option, the entity that has the optional participation, automatic parent entity na yun. And the other one, mandatory, yun yung child entity. And you know the drill, no? Pag parent, copy lang yung primary key, lagay mo sa child entity, and yun, ganun lang. No? So as described previously at the number 3, uh, yung sa third na kanina sa one to many na binary relationship. So a copy of the primary key, ayun, inulit ko lang yung sinabi ko kanina. A copy of the primary key of the parent entity is placed in the relation representing the child entity. And if the relationship has one or more attributes, these attributes should follow the posting of the primary key to the child entity. So, this is just pretty much the same as itong dalawa na discuss dito. Kung ano yung ginawa natin sa one to many sa number 3, no? It's the same goes with the mandatory participation on one side. So, yun, meron na tayong guide, no? Yung optional, yung parent, yung mandatory, child. So, let's have an example, no? So, let's say we're going to modify this example kanina, no? Client pa rin, and then preference. And since client, no? Ito, 0, no? So, kung babasahin natin ito, client states 0 or 1 preference. So, in other words, hindi lahat ng client may sinabi na state, sorry. Hindi lahat ng client may sinate na preference. Yan. So, since as mentioned kanina, no, kung 0 to, kung 1 to mandatory, kung 0 optional. Now, since 0 nga to, so therefore the client is optional. Optional yung ano niya. Optional. And ito, this one here is the mandatory. Since 1 yung ano niya. Mandatory. Okay. Okay. So, matik, no? Pag optional, parent. Pag child, mandatory. Pag mandatory, child. Pag optional, parent. Okay. So, once alam na natin alin dito yung parent and child, so, ganun. You just apply what we did with the step 3. Yung number 3 kanina. So, one to many. Ayun. Okay. Client number, primary key, copy lang sa preference. Okay. Ganun lang. And note that the foreign key attribute of the preference relation also forms the relation's primary key. No? Is referring to this one. Ito. This one. No. Kasi yung preference, originally, ito lang yung attributes niya. And since this is, yung preference pala is the child between the client and preference relation. So, yun, kinapi yung primary key nito, kinapi dito. This one is our F key, foreign key. And, automatic na ito, this FK natin, also, magiging primary key na rin siya. So, dalawa yung ano nito, ni client number. Not only this was a foreign key, galing sa client key, this will also serve as the primary key for this preference na relation. So, ganon. Kaya, ito yung sinabi niya dito, no? Okay? Now, note that the foreign key attribute of the preference relation also forms the relation's primary key. Kaya ganon. Okay. In this situation, the primary key for the preference relation could not have been identified, no? Hindi natin ma-identify yung primary key sa preference relation until after the foreign key, no? Yung referring to yung foreign key natin, we are referring to the client number, no? Until after the client number, the foreign key, has been posted from the client relation to the preference relation. Yun. So therefore, at the end of this step, we should identify any new primary key or candidate keys that have been formed in the process and update the data dictionary accordingly. Okay. And let's proceed to the last, yung third scenario. And let's say kung optional participation yung both sides. So in this case, the designation of the parent and child entities is arbitrary. So pag sinabing arbitrary, pwedeng yung isa, parent, child, pwedeng the other is, pwedeng may interchange. No? Pwedeng isa maging child and then parent. Okay? Unless we can find out more about the relationship that can help us make a decision one way or the other. So, may pahabol siya no. It's not all in all cases nga pwede mong ma-interchange no, unless we can find out pala no, more about the relationship. So that could also no. Anyway, we have an example. And let's say staff, iba na to by the way. This is a different relationships no, staff and then car. So staff, so 0, so which means optional lang yung participation is staff. So which means na not all staff uses a car. And ito naman no, 0, so which means optional din yung participation in car. So which means not a car is being used by 0 or 1 staff. Yeah. So this is how you're going to, again, arbitrary. Pag sinabing arbitrary, pwedeng yung mangyayari is pwedeng ito maging child, ito magiging parent, or the other way around, pwedeng ito magiging parent, and this one is the child. So yun. You can interchange no. Pwedeng ito child, ito yung parent, or pwede rin parent or child. So that is why we have two answers for this one. So ito yung first solution no. So ganito, in this case yung staff yung naging tawag ito, yung naging primary yung parent no? Siya yung naging parent, and then yung car siya yung naging child. Kaya yung primary kinang staff, kinapi siya dito. Yan. See? And the other way, other solution is yung ito. So this time, yung car yung naging parent dito. And yung staff yung naging child. Okay? So same pa rin, yung primary key, kinapi natin.